Hey, cruel motorcyclist kicked a dog for fun, without knowing that Dwayne Johnson, the Rock, was the owner. The smoke alarm wailed through the small apartment, but Harper couldn't move. She stood frozen in the middle of her kitchen, staring at the flames dancing across the stovetop. The acrid smell of burning plastic filled her lungs, but it wasn't the fire that paralyzed her. It was the note, the one she'd just received, now clutched in her trembling hand. I know what happened that night. Meet me at the lighthouse tomorrow at sunset, or everyone else will know too. Water boiled over the pot she'd forgotten, sizzling as it hit the burner and sending more smoke into the air. The tea kettle screamed, a piercing echo of the alarm above. But all Harper could hear was the roaring in her ears, the sound of her carefully constructed life crumbling around her. 5 years of silence. 5 years of rebuilding. 5 years of lying to everyone, including herself. All of it threatened by 7 simple words, scrawled in handwriting she didn't recognize. The sound of pounding at her door finally broke through her trance. Harper, are you okay? I smell smoke. Her neighbor's voice cut through the chaos. With mechanical movements, Harper turned off the burner and moved the smoking pot to the sink. She crumpled the note and shoved it deep into her pocket before opening the doors. I'm fine, Mrs. Ramirez, she said, forcing a smile. Just burned dinner. Everything's under control. But nothing was under control. Not anymore. As she closed the door, Harper slid down against it until she hit the floor. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and dialed the one person she swore she'd never call again. Dwayne, she whispered when he answered. Someone knows. Harper didn't always been a woman with secrets. At 27, she'd been an open book, naive, optimistic, and utterly devoted to her career as a marine biologist at the New Harbor Research Center. Her friends used to tease her about her transparency, how her emotions showed plainly on her face, how she couldn't tell a lie without her ears turning red. You're like a walking polygraph, her best friend would laugh. That was before the storm, before everything changed. Harper had grown up in New Harbor, a small coastal town in Maine where fishing boats outnumbered cars and everyone knew everyone else's business. She'd left for college determined never to return, but the prestigious research position had been too good to pass up. Besides, 5 years was enough time for wounds to heal, for people to forget. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 18, leaving her alone except for her younger brother, Duke, who was 15 at the time. Their Aunt Clara had taken them in, but the damage was done. Duke started acting out, skipping school, experimenting with drugs, collecting a series of misdemeanors. Harper had escaped to college, leaving him behind, a decision that haunted her daily. When she returned to New Harbor with her PhD, Duke was 20, working on fishing boats and staying mostly out of trouble. He'd been clean for 2 years by then had his own apartment and seemed to have his life together. Their reunion had been cautious but hopeful. Then came Dwayne "The Rock" Morrison, the new research director at the center. Tall, with perpetually tousled dark hair and intense eyes that crinkled when he smiled, he'd swept into Harper's carefully ordered life like a hurricane. Their connection was immediate and overwhelming. You're brilliant, he'd told her after reading her research proposal. Your approach to microplastic remediation could change everything. For the first time, Harper felt seen not just for her work, but for her mind. Their late nights at the lab turned into dinners, which turned into more. Within 6 months, they were inseparable. Within a year, they were engaged. Duke had been suspicious of Dwayne from the start. He's hiding something, Duke had insisted one night over dinner at Harper's apartment. I see it in his eyes. Trust me, sis, I know liars when I see them. Harper had dismissed his concerns as overprotectiveness. You don't know him like I do, she'd said firmly. What she couldn't admit, even to herself, was the tiny seed of doubt Duke had planted. There were moments when Dwayne seemed elsewhere, when his phone would ring and he'd step outside to answer, when he'd cancel plans last minute for vague work emergencies. But she'd pushed these thoughts away, choosing trust over suspicion. That is, until the night of the storm. Hurricane Eliza hadn't been expected to hit New Harbor directly. The forecast had changed abruptly, sending the town into chaos as everyone rushed to secure their homes and boats. Harper had been at the research center, helping move sensitive equipment to higher ground when Duke called. "Dwayne's down at the marina," he'd said, his voice nearly drowned out by the howling wind. "He's acting weird, sis. I think he's meeting someone." "What are you talking about?" she'd snapped, annoyed at his persistent distrust. "I'm telling you, something's not right. He's loading boxes onto a boat in a hurricane." Against her better judgment, Harper had driven to the marina. The wind rocked her car as she parked, rain pelting the windshield so hard she could barely see. She'd spotted Duke's truck and then, through the sheets of rain, Dwayne's figure moving rapidly on the farthest dock. What happened next played in her nightmares for years. The confrontation on the dock, the revelation that the boxes contained research data, stolen proprietary information Dwayne was selling to a rival company. Duke's fury as he lunged at Dwayne, the crack as heads hit wood, the struggle as all three of them slipped on the rain-soaked planks. And then, the splash, as Dwayne fell into the churning water below. Harper had screamed, reaching for him, but the current was too strong. Duke had held her back from jumping in after him. "He's gone, Harper. We have to go." They'd reported it as an accident, a tragic casualty of the storm. No one questioned it. People died in hurricanes. It was a sad reality of coastal life. Stolen research was forgotten, the boxes lost to the sea. No body was ever recovered. For 5 years, Harper and Duke had kept their silence, bound by a secret that slowly drove them apart. Duke left New Harbor 6 months after the incident, unable to bear the weight of their shared guilt. Harper stayed, retreating into her work, becoming the reserved, private woman the town now knew. Until the note arrived, threatening to unravel everything. Harper's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles turned white as she drove toward the lighthouse the following evening. The coastal road curved dangerously close to the cliff edge, the ocean churning angrily below, as if remembering that night 5 years ago. When her phone rang, she nearly swerved off the road. "Did you reach Duke?" Dwayne's voice was tight with anxiety. Even after 5 years, the sound of it sent a chill down her spine. "No," she said flatly. "He's not answering." After Dwayne's miraculous return 2 months ago, a story he'd spun about amnesia and being rescued by a fishing boat from a neighboring town, Harper had maintained her distance. She'd pretended to accept his explanation, all while watching him carefully, waiting for him to reveal his true intentions. The town had celebrated his miraculous return, but Harper knew better. The man who came back wasn't the same man who'd fallen into the ocean. "Harper, we need to be careful here. We don't know who sent the note or what they actually know." "We?" She laughed bitterly. "There is no we, Dwayne. There hasn't been for 5 years. Look, I know you don't trust me. I wouldn't either. But right now, whoever sent that note is threatening both of us. We need to handle this together." She gripped the phone tighter. "What really happened that night, Dwayne? The truth this time." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the static of the connection and the roar of the ocean outside her car. "I'll tell you everything at the lighthouse," he finally said. "I promise." The lighthouse stood stark white against the darkening sky when Harper arrived, its beam already cutting through the gathering dusk. The parking lot was empty except for a single black SUV she didn't recognize. She checked her watch. 10 minutes until sunset. As she climbed the rocky path, wind whipping her hair across her face, Harper fought back the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. This lighthouse had been her sanctuary once, a place she came to think, to breathe. Now it felt like a trap. The door at the base was unlocked. Heart-pounding, Harper stepped inside and began the long climb up the spiral staircase. Each step felt heavier than the last, her breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. When she reached the top, the observation deck was empty. The glass-enclosed space offered a 360-degree view of the coastline, painted now in the fiery oranges and pinks of sunset. Harper moved to the railing, looking out at the vast ocean that had supposedly claimed, and then returned Dwayne. "He's not coming." Harper whirled around to find Duke standing in the doorway. His face hardened by the years since she'd last seen him. He looked older than his 25 years, weathered by more than just time. "Duke, what are you—" Her voice caught as understanding dawned. "You sent the note." He stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. "I had to get—" "You here? You wouldn't have come if you knew it was me." "5 years, Duke, 5 years without a word, and then you threatened me." The hurt in her voice was raw. "I tried calling. You blocked my number." His eyes, so like her own, held a mixture of anger and pain. "After everything we went through together, you shut me out. Because you ran away, you left me here alone with this weight." Duke moved to the window, looking out at the same ocean. "I couldn't stay, not with him gone, not with what we did." "What we did?" Harper's voice rose. "It was an accident. We've been over this." "Was it?" Duke turned to face her. "Because Dwayne doesn't seem very dead to me." The silence that followed was deafening. Harper felt her world tilting dangerously. "How long have you known he's back?" she finally whispered. "A month. I saw his picture in an article about the research center." Duke's laugh was hollow. "Imagine my surprise, the man we watched drown, smiling for the camera like nothing happened. He claims he had amnesia, that he was rescued." "And you believe that?" Duke cut her off. "After everything he did? The lies, the stolen research?" Harper moved to the bench that circled the observation deck and sank down, suddenly exhausted. "Of course not. But what was I supposed to do? Accuse him of faking his own death? Who would believe me?" Duke sat beside her, the anger seeming to drain out of him. "I would have. I always believed you, sis, even when you chose him over me." The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. She had chosen Dwayne, had defended him against Duke's suspicions, had been blind to what was right in front of her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words inadequate for the years of silence between them. Duke took her hand, his calloused palm rough against hers. "I came back because he's up to something. The same people he was working with before, they're back too. I've been watching them." Harper felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean?" "There's a company called Steel Fangs that just opened a facility north of here. 3 of their executives were at the research center yesterday meeting with Dwayne." "How do you know this?" Duke's smile was grim. "I have friends in low places. The point is, he's doing it again. Whatever he was stealing 5 years ago, he's still after it." Harper stood abruptly, pacing the small space. "No, the research was abandoned after that night. The funding dried up when the project leader disappeared." "Your project," Duke said quietly. "Your microplastic remediation technology." She stopped, staring at him. "How did you know it was mine?" "Because I read, Harper. Your name is on the patents you filed last month." The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her recent breakthrough, the culmination of years of work done in secret, away from the research center. She'd only filed the paperwork 4 weeks ago. And suddenly, Dwayne was back. "He's after my research," she breathed. The sound of the door opening made them both turn. Dwayne stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the now dark stairwell, his face in shadow. "Not exactly," he said, stepping into the light, "but you're closer than you think." The tension in the lighthouse observation deck was thick enough to cut. Harper positioned herself between the 2 men, acutely aware of Duke's coiled posture, ready to spring. "You have 60 seconds to explain before I throw you back into the ocean myself," Duke growled. Dwayne held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I deserve that. I deserve worse. But you need to hear me out." "Why should we believe anything you say?" Harper demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Because I can prove it." Dwayne reached slowly into his jacket, pulling out a thumb drive. "Everything is on here. The real reason I was at the marina that night, who I've been working with, and why I had to disappear." Harper made no move to take it. "Just tell us." Dwayne's eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw a glimpse of the man she'd once loved, earnest, intense, brilliant. "I was working with Hank Morrison, an undercover detective. Steel Fangs has been involved in industrial espionage for years, targeting cutting-edge environmental technologies. When they approached me about stealing your research, Harper, I went. To the authorities. Duke scoffed. Convenient story. It's the truth, Dwayne insisted. The night of the hurricane, I was supposed to meet my handler. The boxes had fake data, breadcrumbs we were using to trap Steel Fang's operatives. He turned to Harper. I couldn't tell you. They made it clear that anyone who knew was in danger. So what happened in the water? Harper asked, her mind racing, to reconcile this new narrative with her memories. I was pulled under by the current. When I surfaced, I was far from the dock. I saw you both looking for me, but I couldn't fight the tide. His voice grew quieter. I washed up 2 miles down the coast with a concussion that left me with significant memory loss. By the time I pieced things together, months had passed and the operation was compromised. And we're supposed to believe you just happened to recover your memory right when I filed my patent. Harper's skepticism was evident. No, Dwayne shook his head. I've been working with Detective Morrison the entire time. When your patent application appeared, it triggered alerts. Steel Fangs is making another move, Harper, and this time they're not being subtle. The lighthouse beacon rotated, sending periodic flashes of light across their faces as they stood in tense silence. Show me proof, Harper finally said. Real proof, not just files on a drive you could have fabricated. Dwayne pulled out his phone and dialed a number, putting it on speaker. It's Morrison, he said when someone answered. I'm with them now. Dr. Parker, Mr. Parker. A woman's crisp, authoritative voice filled the room. This is Detective Clara Rodriguez. I'm one of Detective Morrison's partners. I understand you have questions, and you deserve answers. Dwayne has been working undercover for us for 6 years, initially infiltrating Steel Fangs, and later helping us track their activities. Why should we believe you? Duke challenged. You could be anyone. Check your email, Dr. Parker, the detective replied calmly. I've just sent you verification of my credentials and documentation of our operation, cleared for your eyes only as of 10 minutes ago. Harper pulled out her phone with shaking hands. The email was there, containing scanned police credentials and documents detailing Operation Clearwater, a multi-year investigation into corporate espionage targeting environmental technologies. Her eyes scanned the document, catching phrases like undercover operative Dwayne Morrison and staged disappearance during Hurricane Eliza. The final page contained a bombshell. Surveillance photos of 2 Steel Fangs executives meeting with someone she recognized, Dr. Alan Westfield, the current director of the research center. Westfield is working with them? She gasped. Yes, Detective Rodriguez confirmed over the speaker, and he's not the only one. Your research represents a potential billion-dollar industry, Dr. Parker. There are powerful interests who want to control it or bury it. So why come back now? Duke asked Dwayne, still suspicious. Why blow your cover? Because Harper's in danger, Dwayne said simply. Steel Fangs doesn't just want to steal your research this time. They want to discredit it entirely, make it seem fundamentally flawed so they can continue selling their own inferior solutions. Harper's mind reeled with the implications. Her technology could clean microplastics from the ocean at a fraction of the current cost, potentially revolutionizing ocean cleanup efforts worldwide. If Steel Fangs succeeded in discrediting her work, it could set environmental progress back decades. We need your help, Dr. Parker, Detective Rodriguez continued. Both of you. We're close to bringing down their entire operation, but we need someone on the inside who understands the science well enough to identify exactly what they're targeting. Harper looked from her phone to Dwayne, then to Duke. 5 years of guilt, of silence, of rebuilding her life around a lie, all of it based on a misunderstanding. The weight that had settled on her shoulders that stormy night suddenly felt different, not gone, but transformed. What exactly are you asking me to do? She asked. Play along, Dwayne said. Let them think their plan is working. Give them access to your lab, your research, but only what we want them to see. It's dangerous, Duke protested. Harper's not a trained agent. No, but she's a brilliant scientist who knows her work better than anyone, Dwayne countered. And she won't be alone. He looked at Harper, his eyes pleading. I know I have no right to ask for your trust again, but this is bigger than us. The lighthouse beacon swept around again, illuminating the 3 of them in its brief, harsh light before returning them to relative darkness. Harper felt the weight of the decision before her, the paths diverging as clearly as light from shadow. "I'll do it," she said finally. "Not for you, not for the police, but for the research. It matters too much to let them destroy it." Duke stepped closer to her. "Then I'm in too. You're not facing this alone, sis. Not this time." Detective Rodriguez's voice came through the speaker again. "We'll set up a secure line of communication. Dwayne will remain your primary contact, but you'll have direct access to me if needed." As they finalized details, Harper moved to the window, looking out at the dark ocean stretching endlessly before her. 5 years ago, that same ocean had torn her life apart. Now it was giving her a chance to put the pieces back together, differently but perhaps more truthfully than before. Behind her, she heard Duke and Dwayne speaking in low voices, the hostility still present, but tempered by the common purpose they now shared. The past couldn't be erased, but maybe it could be rewritten. The note that had terrified her. Yesterday now seemed like a gift, a jarring but necessary disruption to the careful fiction she'd been living. Whatever came next would be dangerous, uncertain, but it would be real. And after 5 years of living with ghosts, reality, however frightening, felt like a step forward. Harper took a deep breath of the salt-tinged air and turned back to face the two men who had shaped her past and would now shape her future. The truth had finally surfaced, like a body long lost at sea. Now it was time to face it. 3. Weeks later, Harper stood in her lab at the research center, carefully adjusting the parameters on her experimental filtration system. Through the glass walls, she could see Dr. Westfield watching her, pretending to be engaged in conversation with a colleague while keeping her in his sightline. She smiled to herself, making a show of frustration as she recorded false readings. In her research log, the one she knew would be photographed within hours of her leaving, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Package delivered. Second floor storage room." Harper stretched casually and left the lab, nodding politely to colleagues as she made her way to the stairwell. The storage room was empty when she arrived, but the small tracking device was exactly where Duke had promised to leave it, hidden inside a box of pipette tips on the third shelf. As she pocketed the device, she heard footsteps approaching. Harper grabbed a random box of supplies just as the door opened. "Dr. Parker." Alan Westfield's surprise seemed genuine. "I didn't expect to find you here." "Just restocking," she said lightly, holding up the box. "My graduate students go through these like water." Westfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I was actually looking for you. I've been reviewing your latest reports, and I'm concerned about some inconsistencies in your data." Harper felt her heart rate increase, but kept her expression neutral. "Oh, what kind of inconsistencies?" "Your filtration rates seem to vary significantly between trials. It's unusual for your work to lack precision." His tone was conversational, but his eyes were sharp, watching for her reaction. This was the moment they'd prepared for, Steel Fangs making their move to discredit her research. Harper let her shoulders slump slightly, allowing genuine fatigue to show. "To be honest, I've been struggling with the new polymer matrix," she admitted, the half-truth coming easily. "It's not bonding consistently with the nanoparticles." Westfield's expression shifted to one of sympathetic concern, so false it nearly made Harper laugh. "You know, I have a colleague at Steel Fangs who's been working on similar binding issues. Perhaps a consultation would be helpful. Off the record, of course." "That would be incredibly helpful, actually." Harper infused her voice with grateful relief. "Their polymer research is years ahead of anyone else's." "I'll set it up. Dinner, perhaps. Tomorrow evening. Their head of R&D is in town briefly." Harper smiled, hiding her triumph behind a mask of professional gratitude. "That would be perfect, thank you." As Westfield walked away, Harper felt a strange sense of exhilaration. The tracker in her pocket would allow the police to monitor the meeting, gathering crucial evidence of Steel Fang's attempts to sabotage her work. More importantly, it would lead them to higher-level executives who had managed to remain at arm's length from the operation so far. Back in her lab, Harper texted the secure number Dwayne had given her. "Meeting set. Tomorrow night." His response came immediately. "Well done. Duke's in position for surveillance. I'll be your dinner companion." Harper put down her phone and turned to the window, looking out at the harbor where everything had begun 5 years ago. The water glittered in the afternoon sun, deceptively peaceful. The truth had nearly drowned in those waters once. This time it would rise to the surface for everyone to see. When Harper arrived at the upscale restaurant in Portland the following evening, she was surprised to find Dwayne already seated at a table with Westfield and 2 men in expensive suits. She recognized one from the surveillance photos, Victor Kane, Steel Fang's VP of Research and Development. "Dr. Parker," Westfield stood to greet her, "so glad you could join us. You remember Dwayne, of course, and this is Victor Kane and James Merritt from Steel Fangs." Harper shook hands with each man, noting the firm grip and calculating eyes of Kane. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I've followed your company's work for years." "The pleasure is ours," Kane replied smoothly. "Your remediation approach is fascinating, revolutionary, some might say." "If it works," she added with a self-deprecating smile, "that's the challenge I'm facing." The conversation flowed easily through appetizers, carefully dancing around the real purpose of their meeting. Harper played her part perfectly, the brilliant but struggling scientist, increasingly open after each glass of wine she barely sipped. Finally, Kane leaned forward. "Dr. Parker, let me be direct. We believe your approach has tremendous potential, but you've hit a wall that our resources could help you overcome." "What exactly are you proposing?" Harper asked, allowing a note of hope to enter her voice. "A partnership. Steel Fangs would provide resources, lab space, and our proprietary binding technology. You would bring your filtration system and expertise." "And the patent rights?" Harper raised an eyebrow. "Shared, of course," Merritt interjected, "with generous compensation for your contribution." Harper pretended to consider the offer, feeling the weight of the recording device in her purse capturing every word. "I'd need to see the specifics. My current data issues are concerning but not insurmountable." "About those issues," Kane's voice dropped lower, "our analysis suggests the problem may be more fundamental than you realize. The nanoparticle configuration you're using may be inherently unstable at scale." This was it, the moment where they would try to convince her that her entire approach was flawed, steering her toward their inferior but profitable alternative. "I don't understand," Harper frowned. "My lab trials show stability up to 500 liters. Kane smiled condescendingly. "Lab conditions rarely translate to real-world applications, Dr. Parker. We've run some simulations based on your published parameters, and the results are concerning." He pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table, displaying complex charts that Harper immediately recognized as manipulated data. The fabricated simulation showed catastrophic failure of her filtration system at scale, a complete fiction designed to shake her confidence. "This can't be right," she murmured, feigning distress. "I'm afraid it is," Westfield said softly. "The perfect picture of regretful concern. I've reviewed their analysis. The math is solid." Harper looked up at them, letting tears gather in her eyes. "Years of work. I don't understand how I missed this." "Science is full of blind alleys," Kane said sympathetically. "The question now is where you go from here. Steel Fangs can offer you a fresh start, working with our approach instead." Harper wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. "I need some air. Excuse me for a moment." In the restroom, she locked herself in a stall and pulled out her phone, quickly texting Dwayne. They took the bait. Full simulation forgery. His response was immediate. "Perfect. Officers moving in 10 minutes. Get ready to leave." Harper took a deep breath, steeling herself for the final act. When she returned to the table, she wore the expression of a defeated scientist ready to compromise. "I think I'd like to see your facilities," she told Kane. "If my approach is flawed, I need to understand why." Kane's triumphant smile was barely concealed. "Of course, we have a car waiting. We can go now if you'd like." "Now?" Harper glanced at Dwayne, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "No time like the present," Merritt added. "Our lab is fully staffed 24/7. As they stood to leave, Harper noticed 2 men in suits entering the restaurant. One caught her eye briefly, Detective Morrison's partner. The trap was set. They had just reached the entrance when Dwayne's phone rang. He checked it and frowned. It's the research center security system. Something's triggered an alarm in the main lab. Westfield looked alarmed. The prototype. I need to check this, Dwayne said urgently. Harper, you go ahead with them. I'll catch up. Before anyone could object, Dwayne hurried toward the parking lot, ostensibly to return to the research center, but actually to coordinate with the police officers preparing to raid Steel Fang's facility once Harper was safely inside gathering evidence. As Harper slid into the back seat of a sleek black car between Kane and Merritt, she felt a momentary flash of fear. She was truly alone now, heading into enemy territory with two men who wouldn't hesitate to destroy her career, or worse, to protect their interests. But then she remembered the tracker in her purse, the officers following at a discreet distance, and Duke positioned near Steel Fang's facility with a parabolic microphone to capture conversations outside the building. She wasn't alone at all. For the first time in 5 years, Harper felt the weight lifting from her shoulders. Whatever happened next, she had finally stopped running from the truth. The arrest of Victor Kane and James Merritt made national headlines, especially when the police released evidence of Steel Fang's systematic corporate espionage targeting environmental technologies across the country. Dr. Alan Westfield's involvement shocked the scientific community, turning what might have been an industry scandal into a cautionary tale. Discussed in ethics classes for years to come, Harper stood at the railing of the research center's oceanfront deck, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of amber and gold. The door opened behind her, and she knew without turning that it was Duke. The police finished clearing out Westfield's office, he said, leaning on the railing beside her. They found documents going back 8 years. This was bigger than anyone realized. I still can't believe he was involved the whole time. Harper shook her head. I trusted him. You weren't the only one. Duke looked out at the horizon, his profile softened in the fading light. The board's unanimous, by the way. They're offering you the director position. Harper turned to him in surprise. I didn't apply. Apparently, exposing corporate espionage and developing revolutionary environmental technology makes you a strong candidate, Duke smiled. You should take it, sis. The center needs someone with integrity at the helm. She considered the offer, feeling both the weight and the potential of it. Would you stay, if I did? Duke's smile faded slightly. I don't know. I've been gone a long time. New Harbor's still home, she said softly. For both of us. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the gulf of the past 5 years narrowing with each day that passed. Dwayne's leaving, Duke finally said, got reassigned to the West Coast. Harper nodded, unsurprised. He told me yesterday. Detective Morrison wants him to investigate similar cases in California. Are you okay with that? Duke's question was careful, neutral. Yes, Harper said, and meant it. What we had was real, at least for me, but it's in the past. Too much has happened. The door opened again and Dwayne stepped onto the deck. He hesitated when he saw them together, then approached with the cautious respect that had characterized their interactions since the lighthouse meeting. I came to say goodbye, he said simply. My flight leaves in the morning. Harper turned to face him fully. Thank you for everything. I should be thanking you, Dwayne replied. Your courage made this operation successful. Duke extended his hand, a peace offering that surprised both Dwayne and Harper. Safe travels. As they shook hands, Harper felt the final piece of her past settle into place. The three of them would never again be what they had once been to each other, lover, brother, adversary, but they had forged something new through fire and truth. Respect. When Dwayne left, Harper turned back to the ocean, Duke beside her. The sun had nearly disappeared, leaving a thin line of fire on the horizon. So, Duke nudged her shoulder gently, Director Parker, has a nice ring to it. Harper smiled, feeling the future open up before her like the vast ocean. I think I'll take it, on one condition. What's that? That you'll consider running the new field research program. We'll need someone coordinating with the fishing community, someone they trust. Duke looked surprised, then thoughtful. "You know, I might actually be good at that." As darkness settled over New Harbor, Harper felt a sense of completion. The lighthouse beam swept over the water in the distance, steadfast, reliable, illuminating the way forward through whatever storms might come. After 5 years of silence, the truth had finally been spoken. And in that truth, Harper had found not just justice but redemption.